Let me just review this for a minute. First, we know that gases capable of warming the atmosphere have been building up very fast for a century or so, and that carbon dioxide in particular is at a concentration in the air now unseen for at least 15 million years. Second thing we know is that Earth is about a degree warmer than it would have been without the human greenhouse effect. The third thing is that another degree of warming would take the Earth into the temperature range where no northern hemisphere ice sheets would survive. We know that another 2 degrees of warming on top of that would bring the Earth into the range of temperatures where even the great Antarctic ice sheet would become unstable. We know that the West Antarctic ice sheet is vulnerable to melting and would probably begin to disintegrate under conditions similar to those which were enough to melt Greenland. We know that another 3 degrees of warming is a virtual certainty if we don't get carbon dioxide emissions under control in the next half century. And finally, we know for a certainty that the effects of an induced climate catastrophe would become unavoidable once they got well underway. They would escalate for a couple of 100 years at least, and they would last in total for many thousands, tens of thousands of years. A catastrophic warming would have a great many effects on the entire ecology of the planet, on human society and on all living species. There's no time to go into any of those now, but I will concentrate on one of them just to give you a feel for the scale of the disaster that we're looking at. This is Greenland, a large island in the Arctic Circle, virtually covered by a single ice sheet. That ice is about 2 kilometers thick in the middle of the island. This is the ice sheet that covered Canada and the northern United States as short a time as 18,000 years ago. It's all gone now, but that too was over 2 kilometers thick when it existed. This is Antarctica. This part, which lies west of the Transantarctic Mountains, is called the West Antarctic Ice Sheet. It has about 10% of the ice there, and studies have shown that its geophysical properties make it much more vulnerable to warming and melting than the much larger eastern ice sheet. Now, all land-based ice is made of water taken from the ocean, so when it melts, the water goes back there. In other words, by measuring the ice volume in an ice sheet, you can tell exactly how much water is going to enter the ocean and how much the sea level will rise. It turns out that the West Antarctic ice sheet is good for about 6.5 meters, and Greenland for about 5. This is a story of what happened to the sea level in the warming following the last glaciation. Here is where it began to warm up 18,000 years ago, and here is the stable 6,000 year period, in fact unusually stable, that humans have been around. And here's a period of rapid melting 14,000 years ago in which the sea level rose 5 meters a century for 400 or 500 years, 15 times as fast as it's doing now. This is the last thing I want to show you. It's a chart drawn by oceanographer David Archer to try to show that we might have more to worry about rising sea levels than is commonly assumed. These are well-established points of climate history with the cold and low sea level there and the warm and high sea level there. This one here is where the last ice age reached its maximum, cold, 20,000 years ago. This is the warmest time in the previous interglacial, 120,000 years ago. And this is the birth of the northern ice sheets 3 million years ago. Notice how they pretty well line up. The top point belongs to the warm Eocene optimum 50 million years ago, and of course there was no ice, and the point is off the line. Now here's the point. The IPCC has forecast that much sea level rise, around about 2 feet, where that point should be on the graph. That much warming should produce 30 meters of sea level rise at some time. Well, you don't need a lot of imagination to understand the disaster that 5 or 10, let alone 30 metres of sea level rise would be. Quite apart from displacing billions of people and drowning incalculable assets, the sea would continue to rise for centuries. So no possible adaptive strategy could work, and retreat would be the only option. And while we're coping with that, we would have to deal with fantastic numbers of refugees, diminished food supplies, growing deserts, vast heat waves, shortages of water, giant storms, and a whole lot else. And that's just the human side of the problem. Other species would have to get by as best they could and would probably fare even worse. The result of Copenhagen has given us much to think about. One thing it's made clear, I think, is that the political systems that we rely on now are just not up to the job of taking the decisions and causing the actions that we need. When you think about it, that isn't surprising. Politicians have never before been asked to induce sacrifices for the people who vote for them so that people of the future will benefit. Many people have thought hard about this. How can we make our leaders do what they should do for the sake of our grandkids? Well, I think the answer has 3 parts. First, it's up to us, all the folks in the world who care about this, to make sure that our politicians get it, understand just how bad and how urgent it is, and how utterly irresponsible and immoral it would be for us to neglect our duty towards these kids, consigning them to live in a ruined world. They must be talked out of their present preference for what Jim Hansen calls greenwash. That's the politician's habit of talking a lot about their commitment and doing nothing that inconveniences anybody. Second, we, the people of the world, have to let them know that we demand this. This is a problem that makes the preoccupations of national politics look crazy. It's simply not going to go away if we use the political system the way we usually do. It may well be that individual countries have to work out solutions to suit themselves. But unless we do it as citizens of one planet, there's no way we can do it in time or thoroughly enough. Tell politicians what it is you want to happen. Finally, we must do something about the big gap that exists between what climate scientists know and what everybody else knows. Now, I'm well aware that there are many people in the public discourse who've been throwing into this gap misinformation and propaganda. Without speculating on their reasons, I can tell you that this has become a big problem, magnifying the effect of such a gap and making political action much harder than it might have been. They call standard views on climate things like alarmist. Some of them even say that the community of climate scientists is a big conspiracy designed to spread lies and make money for themselves. Well, if you find that plausible, you're entitled to a view. But if you're just confused, this is my advice. Don't go to Lord Monckton or Ian Plimer or Bob Carter or Bjorn Lomborg to find out about the climate problem. Go to people who work in it every day, who've mastered the details of a complicated area and who know what they're talking about. Get clued up and spread the word. If you want somewhere to start, try this. This is Jim Hansen's book. Jim's the director of the Goddard Center, knows more about this than almost anyone else on Earth, and is a worried grandfather.